Welcome to Zen-Brain.com. Now, most of you may not have even heard of borderline personality disorder or what we'll be referring to as BPD in this episode, because the cause of this disorder isn't well understood and diagnosis is made based on symptoms. Now, these symptoms may include emotional instability, feelings of worthlessness, insecurity, impulsivity, and impaired social relationships. And now Lipi is a girl who has been diagnosed with BPD. We met her at this psychiatric facility that we at Zen-Brain visited recently. "21-year-old Lipi from Assam has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, a mental health disorder that impacts the way she thinks and feels about herself and others. She suffers from self-image issues, has difficulty managing her emotions and behaviour, and has struggled with personal relationships."
काफ़ी सालों से I didn't realize, like I was living in denial कि मुझे कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, सारी दिक्कत लोगों में है. I used to like struggle making friends. मेरी फ्रेंडशिप एक या दो ही लोगों से मोस्ट प्रोबेबली होती थी, इससे ज़्यादा नहीं होती थी. एंड मेरे रिलेशनशिप्स बहुत बुरे हालातों से गुजरते थे. मुझे तो पहले तो समझ में नहीं आया, लेट वो हुआ मुझे कि हाँ कुछ तो करना चाहिए, कि बहुत ज़्यादा हो गया, ये नॉर्मल नहीं है.
Days before Lipi was admitted to a Delhi-based psychiatric and rehab facility called TULASI, she tried to harm herself.
जब मैं यहाँ आने वाली थी तो 3 दिन लगातार I was hurting myself, I was screaming and for no reason, like I have a bad relationship with my stepfather as well. So बहुत सी चीज़ें हैं, वो सारी चीज़ें रिकॉल होती थी एंड इवन इफ़ आई ट्राइड वो कंट्रोल में नहीं हो पाता था. तो देन आई वाज स्मोकिंग वीड फॉर 3 days क्योंकि रात को बिल्कुल नींद नहीं आती थी. एंड आई यूज़ टू ओवर ईट. जब मैं नहीं खाती थी बिल्कुल नहीं खाती थी 3-4 दिन के लिए, और जब खा रही हूँ तो बहुत ज़्यादा खा रही हूँ. तो दैट वॉज द पॉइंट जब मुझे रियलाइज़ हुआ कि नहीं, अब मुझसे नहीं हो पाएगा एंड इट्स समथिंग बियॉन्ड माई कंट्रोल. तो आई सीक माई मदर फॉर हेल्प. शी डिसाइडेड कि चलो यहाँ पे इस इंस्टीट्यूशन में डालते हैं. मेरे हाथ में जो भी तब आता था, लाइक फ़ोन है तो फ़ोन से मैं अपने सर पे मारती थी, या फिर कैंची होता था तो कैंची से मैं अपने पूरे बॉडी में ऐसे स्क्रैचेस करती थी बहुत ज़ोरों से. तो अभी तो 21 दिन हो गए, आई एम 21 days ओल्ड हियर. सो अब तो काफ़ी सेल्फ कंट्रोल सीख लिया है एंड अब रियलाइज़ होता है कि कितना फुलिश एक्ट था वो.
While she's been admitted for a mental disorder, Lipi connects her illness to her past of abuse by her cousins.
My childhood was not very normal. I lost my father when I was in 5th standard. I was molested by my 4 cousins. एक लड़की थी, बाकी 3 लड़के थे, and in a day-to-day basis, own cousins. They tried to kiss me, they tried to touch me गलत जगहों पे. इतना तो बच्चों को भी समझ में आता है.
Lipi's mother believes there is a definite connection between her daughter's childhood trauma and mental illness.
मेरे रिएक्शन तो यही था कि ये होता है ऐसा, हम ना इस चीज़ को इग्नोर कर देते हैं. नॉर्मली बोला है हाँ ठीक है ऐसा नहीं होगा दोबारा, इस तरह का, और बच्चे को चुप करा दिया जाता है. नॉर्मली मैं भी ऐसे ही किया कि हाँ इस बारे में ज़्यादा बोलने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, हमने बात की है, दोबारा ऐसा नहीं होगा, जबकि ये भी कहीं ना कहीं से गलत है. ये सब चीज़ें ही बाद में दिमाग में असर करता है, ठीक है ना. एक चेंजेस जो आता है ये एक दिन में नहीं आता है, धीरे धीरे गलत चीज़ें भरते भरते आज ये हालत हुई है.
And joining me now is Dr. Vandita Dubey to give us more insight into what exactly this BPD is all about, or borderline personality disorder. Thank you very much for joining us on Zen-Brain, Dr. Dubey. Now, there seems to be a very thin line between different mental disorders. So, how do you differentiate really between mental illness and a personality disorder?
So the main difference between a mental illness and a personality disorder is that mental illnesses are really like any other illness. It's a condition which at one point you did not have and now you have. Like for example, with anxiety disorders or with depression, people can trace back and say, yeah, 2 months ago, or 6 months ago, or a year ago, I was feeling fine. Everything was fine. I could go to work fine. I could study fine. Things were all right. But now, since such and such date, or for so much period of time, I've not been feeling okay. I've been feeling low. I have these negative thoughts, and so on and so forth. So there is clearly a distinction between a time when one felt healthy and normal versus a time when one's been feeling unwell and going through whatever the symptoms are of that particular condition, versus a personality disorder, which is a more long-term kind of and a pervasive kind of a thing. What happens is that somebody who has a personality disorder, if you ask them, they may they will be able to say, of course, that right now is not a good time, or that was not a good time, or whatever it is. But a lot of the issues that are there are they can really trace them back to many years ago. And if you ask the family members also, they'll say, yeah, he or she has been more or less like this for a long time. Now it's worse, or now it's better. There may be that worsening of symptoms, or symptoms becoming better, but there is this pattern of behavior, this pattern of thinking, a pattern of feeling, of experiencing life, which is usually fairly stable in terms of people's experience and what they themselves experience, as well as what people around them observe.
So let's talk about this set of symptoms. How is it different from, say, a moody person or a very troublesome teenager?
There are roughly 4 different areas in which people have challenges in terms of people who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. One, and the most prominent and the most troublesome, is as far as interpersonal relationships are concerned. And this is not something that's fleeting, or it's in one relationship, or it's just at one point in time. It's usually that people who have a borderline personality disorder do have challenges with close relationships, and one can typically see them across years, so not just teenage years, but through the grown-up years and so on. So that is one area. And then there is also so one is in terms of interpersonal relationships, the other is in terms of their own sense of self, and how do they feel about themselves. That's also a very consistent kind of a issue that they have with that, which stays across the years. And in terms of impulsivity, so that is also a big area of concern, and that's where you see people with borderline who may get into addictions, or who will harm themselves, or get into risky behaviors, and that also is very consistent. And then, of course, the mood. The fluctuation of mood. Now, the fluctuation of mood that you see in somebody who has been diagnosed with borderline, as versus any other disorder like bipolar. So in bipolar, there are different kinds of highs and lows in which people cycle. But whatever those are, they are fairly consistent. There will be days or weeks or sometimes months on end when they are in one particular mood. Whereas with somebody who has a borderline personality disorder, it can fluctuate, through the day, and it's very often very trigger dependent. So if things are going a person's way, then they may be feeling perfectly fine and be feeling great. If they perceive a slight, or they perceive criticism from somebody, or they perceive something negative coming from someone, it can suddenly dip to a low. And the low can be feeling very sad, very horrible, isolated, abandoned, rejected, or it can be turned into anger, rage, whatever. And this can go, it can be a big dip, and it can come back again, all in a span of a few hours. And so it's not that, so as versus other mood disorders, it's very often very reactive, very dependent on what's going on, other situations, and on what is going on in one's life at that point in time. So that's how you make a distinction between mood disorder and borderline personality disorder. And the distinction between somebody who doesn't have a diagnosis and somebody else is, again, okay, once in a blue moon everybody may go through a really horrible mood. You may break a few plates or whatever it is, like a horrible fight that you had, like once in a blue moon. So that kind of a thing is different. But for somebody who has borderline personality disorder, these moods are much more frequent. These eruptions or these kind of very intense kind of emotions which they find very difficult to handle. Those situations happen much more often.
So what you're talking about is intense and extreme moods. Let's go back to interpersonal relationships that you were talking about. How is it different from somebody who's inept at relationships, who doesn't know how to really get along with people? How is that different from BPD?
So it's usually that it's not just interpersonal relationships, right? Where do the issues with interpersonal relationships come from, right? And with somebody who has borderline personality disorder, the interpersonal relationships issues stem from the person who has this diagnosis feeling very, very, very triggered by any feelings of being rejected or abandoned. The thing is, they read abandonment and they read rejection in normal kind of interpersonal things that may happen. Somebody may have interpersonal issues because they are not great with social skills, or somebody may have interpersonal issues because they are very focused on themselves. I mean, different people may have interpersonal issues for different reasons, right? Or you may be okay with your relationships with most people, but with one particular person you just can't get along, right? That's kind of how it is for most people, right? But with somebody who has borderline personality disorder, it's like they're hyper aware, they're hyper vigilant to any kind of perceived rejection, and they read rejection in they can read rejection in anything. You wouldn't return a phone call means you don't care for me anymore, and what that brings up then within me is a very, very, very deep sense of feeling bad, feeling abandoned. The feelings that get evoked are very, very strong and very difficult for the person to manage, and hence emotional reactions are quite intense to seemingly very small kind of issues.
Doc, when we were talking earlier, you had mentioned that in someone suffering from BPD, or as we are talking about borderline personality disorder, there is a tendency to love someone, extreme cases of love and hate for the same person. So you love that person and then you end up hating that same person. Can you give us more details as to what this is all about?
Somebody who has a borderline personality disorder diagnosis, they also have this whole issue with boundaries, right? They don't have a very good sense of how close to get to somebody or not, or to read. I mean, it even fundamentally starts with reading one's own self. So a lot of people with this diagnosis don't have a very clear sense of who they are. They don't have a very clear sense of what they're experiencing. They're not very clear about what they're thinking and what they're feeling. A lot of times they're just reacting, and they're not even sometimes sure what exactly they're reacting to, right? So one is this lack of clarity within one's own self. And then if you don't have great clarity within your own self, and you have this great need for belonging and for acceptance and for love and all of that, that you keep reaching out so to the people, and wherever whoever seems at that point in time, at any point in time, to give the attention, love, whatever it is, then that person is seen as somebody that is very dependable, is there, and all of that. So there's this extreme love and affection for that person then, right? And then the moment there is any kind of boundary that the other person draws, or any kind of criticism, or any kind of anything that's perceived as rejection, then it's like a yo-yo. The person from one emotional state of feeling completely, a sense of belonging with this person and connected with this person and understood by this person and loved by this person, they feel completely rejected then. They feel completely rejected, they feel out of love, they feel like the person doesn't understand and hates them and whatever. And the again, like I said earlier, the emotional reaction that it evokes is really, really, really strong. And the feeling that goes with that inside of a person is that, I'm bad. Really, really feeling bad. That I'm so unlovable, I'm so bad. And then that gets manifested in then extreme anger or upset with that person. So the yo-yo between extreme love and extreme anger. Sometimes you'll say, okay, that person's so melodramatic, such a drama queen. This is that kind of behavior where there is just extremes. There is no normal, there's no ability to see grey and grey in people to say that, okay, somebody can care for me a lot, at the same time not appreciate certain things about me, right? People with borderline personality disorder cannot tolerate that. It's either you completely love me, which means you cannot criticize anything about me, or if you do, then that means you completely hate me.
Doc, this is a larger question. Is borderline personality disorder a consequence of some sort of trauma?
A lot of the people with the borderline personality diagnosis do have a history of abuse that they will share, and that's there in the background, typically growing up years. But it's not always. So one thing that's important to make clear is that it's not that everyone who goes through traumatic experiences develops borderline personality disorder. There are a lot of people who go through traumatic experiences. Some people develop borderline personality disorder. Amongst people who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, a lot of people have gone through traumatic experiences in childhood, but not all of them. So it's possible for somebody to have borderline personality disorder without having had any major negative experiences in childhood.
What kind of connection are we talking about between trauma and BPD?
There's still a lot of research going on, but we do find that, there is a connection between what the child experiences growing up and how they're able to manage stress. So any kind of a traumatic experience and growing up in situations where there's violence or there's abuse or whatever is very stressful for the child, right? And it can be recurring stress. To kind of cope with the stress, and of course the child does different things, but the thing is that all that stress, it doesn't only have an impact on a child's emotions and behaviors, but also on the way the brain functions and how the biology is affected by stress. And we know very, very, very clearly and very well that our brain chemistry and even the rest of the body is affected by stress. There is this whole the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is involved in stress response system, and that whole thing is affected in children who are going through stressful situations. And so how the body learns, how the brain learns to cope with the amount of stress that's created, the amount of stress hormones that are going through, that has a long-lasting impact. And we find that, and researchers are still studying parts of the brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and so on, which seem to be affected when people go through prolonged stressful circumstances. And so it has a more long-lasting effect.
It's very important what you've said. BPD must be regarded as a serious disabling brain disorder, not simply a personality problem, because it alters the brain structure and function.
There is an aspect of genetic vulnerability, which is, as we are seeing in other things, in addictions and all also, that there are certain people who are more vulnerable to stress. So somewhere it's possible, and also knowing that there are people who develop borderline personality disorder who have not gone through stressful experiences. We know that there is a biological component to it, there is a genetic component to it. What exactly it is, how it works out is not absolutely clear, but that is there. But that and then exposure on top of that, exposure to stressful situations, trauma, can lead to something like a borderline personality disorder, and that is why it is very difficult. I mean, so a lot of the other thing that I want to say is that a lot of people with borderline personality disorder, have very intense emotions, very intense experience of emotions, And these are, of course, negative emotions, and they have no way of making sense of them or handling that. And associated with that, there is this whole thing of not being able to control their impulses, and the impulses are often to harm themselves. So we see a lot of people with borderline personality disorder who end up trying to harm themselves. Some of it could be kind of categorized as non-serious injuries, but then there are people who also end up committing suicide and so on. What I'm trying to say is that the emotional pain that a person goes through who has a borderline personality disorder is very, very real. Although sometimes what is very difficult for family members and friends and other people to really figure out is that sometimes they feel it's manipulative. Because what happens is, going back to the whole issue with interpersonal stuff, people with borderline personality disorder, they have a desperate need. It's like they have a desperate need to try and connect, to kind of meet their need to belong, to be loved. It's kind of like a desperate need, and sometimes when they feel that need is not being met, or somebody was meeting that need, but now it looks like they're being critical or whatever it is, and they feel that person, they may lose that person. They will then sometimes, in order to kind of pull back that person into their lives, make threats of self-harm or may do something to self-harm, and so for other people then it seems like the person is being manipulative. But it's important to understand that it's not deviousness really. It's really coming from this very, very desperate kind of a place, and not having the ability to handle these emotions, not being able to feeling like they can even live with these emotions. And of course sometimes there is this great sense of emptiness, or feeling that you really can't even feel anything, and sometimes the self-harm comes from that place as well. But all of this is very real, and like you said, that some of it is because of just the way the brain is functioning, perhaps in a different way, and what the person is experiencing. It's not something that they can snap out of it.
It's very interesting what you said, Doc. You said some people are far more vulnerable and some people are far more prone to stress. So in BPD, people who are suffering from BPD, there is this desperate need for connection, as you've mentioned. And when it's not being met, they are perceived to be manipulative. It's very important because perhaps we would know a person or two like that. But their emotional pain is very, very real, and it's important for family not to dismiss it. So, Doc, is it possible to control or manage borderline personality disorder?
Yeah, you can manage borderline personality disorder. Over time, it's taken people in the field time to figure out what seems to work. One of the persons who's done a lot of work is this psychologist called Marsha Linehan, and she's developed something called DBT, dialectical behaviour therapy, which she trains people for. She was working in a hospital where she would have a lot of people who would come in who were suicidal. And this was at a point when the BPD diagnosis itself hadn't been kind of put together. Through her work with these patients, she figured out that there's certain things that don't work, and so she's developed this thing called DBT, which is basically combining aspects of cognitive behavior therapy and aspects of acceptance and aspects that she's taken from meditation and mindfulness, and she's integrated them into her therapy with people with borderline personality disorder. And research seems to say that a lot of people who have been treated using DBT do see a big change. So change is definitely possible, and there are people who can kind of move out, so learn basically how to sort through their own emotions, learn how to tolerate the intensity of their own emotions without resorting to either self-harm or addictions or the interpersonal stuff that they end up doing. So changing some of those behaviors, so that is definitely very possible. And also more from a long-term perspective, people also seem to see that as people age, some of the symptoms do become less prominent. So it is a lot harder when you're younger, when you're 20s, 30s, but then it kind of seems to even naturally get a little toned down. And with the right kind of therapy and support, people do seem to do a lot better. And like with any kind of mental health condition, a lot has to do with stress. So if one learns how to manage stress and the kind of supportive relationships that one has around oneself, if you have support and you learn how to deal with stress better and you are not in such stressful situations, people do a lot better. And they learn different ways of being and taking care of their emotional well-being. So people can definitely get better, and people do. As a mental health professional, probably also as a family member and all that, one can look out for is that there's kind of a close relationship between borderline personality disorder and PTSD as well. PTSD is very symptom specific. I mean, there are symptoms, there are certain things that happen. Borderline personality disorder, of course, is slightly different. It is more pervasive, and it's not just flashbacks and things like that. So, but a little bit. But what can happen is that sometimes with people with borderline personality disorders, that they may also have PTSD symptoms, or some of those things. For example, this whole feeling of feeling unreal, or not being very in their own bodies and in their own emotions, and the emptiness and boredom, and that self kind of experience. And the other thing also is that I think also with borderline personality disorder, people with this diagnosis, it's not also always that there may be that extreme rage. Sometimes there is extreme despondency, which is different from depression. But there is fluctuations dependent on what's going on in their lives, especially interpersonal relationships. So very reactive to that. But the reaction may not be rage, but it may get expressed more as a deep sense of disappointment, sadness, a low hurt, and being in that way.
Right, change is definitely possible, and with the right form of therapy, sorting out through their own emotions without resorting to self-harm or addictive behaviors, and of course, very importantly, the ability to manage stress. And managing stress is something that we at Zen-Brain will be talking about more in detail over the weeks to come. But on that note, thank you very much, Dr. Dubey, once again for joining us, giving us so much insight.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, keep those questions coming in.